Grocery prices going up like they are, now is the best time for budget meals. Today I'm going to share 5 meals that you can make for $5 or less. Hey there, I'm Brittany Flammer with videos here all about budgeting and money saving tips for you and your family. I'm going to show you all the meals, how to make them, give you a cost breakdown, but also in the description box down below is a link for a printable for all the recipes if you prefer that. I try to save money by using meals that do have meat in them, but meals where meat is not the main attraction. Most of these meals are served with rice or noodles because they are cheap. I also like to include meals with veggies in the main dish so that I don't have to cook a vegetable separate and dirty more dishes and put more effort into another dish. Let's start with Japanese cream stew. This calls for a pound of chicken. I cut it up into small pieces and we'll cook it in a little bit of oil with some onion. Once the chicken's all the way cooked through, then we add carrots and potatoes. Now the recipe calls for 4 carrots peeled and cut up and 3 potatoes peeled and cut up. But the beauty is I use whatever I have on hand. I usually like to add a lot more veggies than what it calls for, but I will just use whatever I have left or whatever is convenient. Add those carrots and potatoes along with 2 cups of water and 2 teaspoons of chicken bouillon or chicken base. Then going to bring it to a boil and just let it simmer until the vegetables are tender. I also like to add in corn. I'll either do a can of corn or some frozen corn. I add that at the very end since they don't take very long to cook. Now while that's simmering, I will make the roux. So in a smaller separate saucepan, melt 3 tablespoons of butter and then add 3 to 4 tablespoons of flour, whisk it, and then gradually add in 2 to 3 cups of milk. And just keep whisking it till it thickens a little bit. Once it's thickened, then I like to add a little bit of cheese. I have never measured it, maybe half of a cup of cheese to give it a little bit of flavor. Once the roux is done, then we pour that into the big pot with the chicken and vegetables. I have made it all in one pot and made the roux in the pot while the vegetables are simmering. It's not quite as good, but it's less dishes if you prefer. Once everything's mixed together, just stir it all together, let it simmer for a minute or 2, and then we serve this over rice. And for our family, about 3 cups of rice, raw rice, cooked, is about the right amount for this meal.
Here's the cost breakdown of the meal, and this is me searching up the prices at Walmart or Sam's.com, not using up anything that I have on hand.
Next recipe is creamy chicken noodle soup. Now, when I hear chicken noodle soup, I think brothy soup that you eat when you're sick. This is not that recipe. It's creamy and rich, and I really love it, and all of our kids really like it, and it's easy. Start with the stock pan, add 6 cups of water with 2 tablespoons chicken base or chicken bouillon, and then we're gonna add the vegetables, carrots, celery, and some onion. It calls for 2 cups of carrots, peeled and cut up, sliced up, and 2 cups of celery cut up, chopped up. Like I said, always like to use more than that, but I'll use whatever I have on hand. Once the vegetables are added, bring it to a boil and then let it simmer until the vegetables are tender. Then we're going to add 2 cans of cream of chicken soup. Now, I personally use homemade cream of chicken soup because it is a little bit cheaper, but we just like the flavor a lot more. I'll include that recipe, the recipe for that with the recipes in the description box down below, but you can just use cans of cream of chicken. It also calls for 2 cups of cooked chicken. Now, I can my own chicken, but before I did that, I would just cook the chicken however and shred it up. So I would either bake it or boil it and then shred it up. That works too. It also calls for 3 cups of egg noodles. Those boil in a separate pot. And then once they're boiled, drain the water and add it to the soup mix. And then just stir it all together and then let it simmer on low for a couple of hours till you're ready to eat.
Here's the breakdown of the soup, and this is using store-bought cream of chicken, not homemade, and not using up vegetables I have on hand.
Next recipe is hamburger gravy. Now, a lot of hamburger gravy recipes use a ton of hamburger, which is really expensive. For this, I don't use a ton. I usually use about 3/4 of a pound of hamburger. You could use more or less. I just buy my hamburger in bulk and then freeze it, and it's usually about 3/4 of a pound. And that works for us. You could use more though. But cook the hamburger with a little bit of onion in your pan until it's all the way cooked through. Now, once the meat's cooked, then go ahead and add about 4 cups of milk. Now, recipe calls for 4 cups. I just eyeball it, but around 4 cups of milk. And you want to stir it and make sure you scrape up any bits that are stuck to the bottom of the pan. Then you're going to go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of chicken bouillon or chicken base, 2 tablespoons of butter. The recipe calls for a teaspoon of sage and then some salt and pepper. I don't ever have sage, so I never add it, and ours is fine, but if you have it, it would probably give it some more flavor. Once you bring that to a boil, let it cook for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to thicken it up. So take half of a cup of flour, mix with 1 cup of milk. I just put it in a container and shake it up, or you could put it in a bowl and whisk it, whatever. But mix it really well so the flour is all mixed into the milk, then pour that into the pot, and just keep stirring until it thickens. Okay, once it's thickened, it's ready to eat. If it's too thick for you, you can add some more milk. If it's too thin, add a little bit more flour to thicken it up. But once it's about the right consistency for you, it's ready to serve. Now, my kids prefer this on homemade bread. I prefer it over biscuits. Homemade bread's a little bit cheaper than the biscuits, but either one works. This is a meal where it doesn't have vegetables in it, so we usually do like a frozen veggie on the side, or if it's summer, whatever's in season.
Here's the cost breakdown for the hamburger gravy. Obviously, it is going to vary drastically based on how much hamburger you use.
The next recipe is a copycat of Cafe Rio chicken. Now, this one's a little bit different. It makes a ton of chicken, so I make it and then I will freeze it. So it actually makes 5 meals of chicken for our family rather than just 1. So it's done in the crock pot. Calls for 5 pounds of boneless, skinless chicken breast. So put the 5 pounds in the crock pot. Make sure I cut off all the fat, put it in the crock pot, add a container of zesty Italian chicken. I always just use the generic cheapest brand I can find, and it's a small container, not a large one. Then a tablespoon of chili powder, tablespoon of cumin, and then 3 garlic cloves. I just buy it and keep it in the refrigerator, but fresh garlic would work great too. Stick it all in the crock pot, cook it on low for 4 hours. After 4 hours, I pull the chicken out and just shred it up with some forks. It doesn't take very long. Put it all back in and then let it cook on low for another hour. After that, it is ready to eat. You can serve it lots of ways. I divide it up into Ziploc bags and freeze it. We usually like to do burritos with it, or you can do salad with it, but for burrito, we'll take a tortilla, we'll put some chicken on it, we add some beans or some refried beans, lettuce, some dressing, whatever ingredients we have on hand already, I will use those to make a burrito.
Here's the price breakdown for the Cafe Rio chicken. This is just me going to the store and buying 5 pounds of chicken today. What I normally do is buy it in bulk so I can get it for cheaper, but here this gives you an idea of what it would cost, and you would also have to include extra toppings if you had to buy the toppings.
The next recipe is one of my favorites because it is easy. It's Parmesan chicken. Usually when you order or if you eat Parmesan chicken, you get a huge chunk of chicken over noodles. This one's a little bit different. I do it in the crock pot, so it's really easy. I take about a pound of chicken. You can do more if you like a lot of chicken, but we usually do about a pound for our family, and I cut it up into smaller bite-sized pieces. Then I take some breadcrumbs and a little bit of Parmesan cheese, the grated Parmesan cheese, mix it in a bowl or container, add those cut up pieces of chicken, shake them all around, then I place them in the crock pot. Then I grate a little bit of cheddar cheese. You can use mozzarella, really you could use any type of cheese. And I don't measure it. I just like to cover it in a little layer of cheese, half cup, 1 cup, whatever I have on hand. And then I will pour a jar of spaghetti sauce over it. Whatever your favorite Prego cheese sauce is, probably my favorite. Whatever you have will work. Now, the recipe for this calls to cook it on low for 6 to 8 hours. However, I have a large crock pot, and crock pot recipes are meant to be cooked when they're mostly full, like 2/3 or 3/4 of the way full. But since we have a large crock pot, just doing one recipe of this does not fill it up. So I cook it on low for like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and then move it to keep warm until we eat, and that's always been plenty for us. However, this is a recipe that's really easy to double and then serve it over noodles.
And here's the cost breakdown for the Parmesan chicken at $4.60 for the meal.
If you want to see exactly how I do my meal planning, I've got a video right up here showing you step by step how I do it. Or if you want to see how I fit our groceries into our budget, I do monthly budgeting videos and budget reports. I'll put the playlist for those right over here. Thanks so much. See you in the next video.